Welcome back to the Barrel Talk Podcast. We are back with another episode of Let's Talk About It. And man, oh man, what an interesting Sunday we had. 2 Game 7s off the board. Now we're into the conference finals. We have a ton of stuff to get into. This is actually a good time to get into because we do have a day break with no games tonight before we get into the conference finals, which we got Boston and Indiana tomorrow night. And then the night after that, we got Mavs and Wolves. Ton of stuff to get into. We're going to be starting off talking about OKC Thunder and Dallas Mavericks series, kind of what's next for the Thunder, what did the Mavs do in that series to get it done. Then we're going to move on to the Pacers and Knicks, how that series wrapped up, and then we're going to hop into Wolves and Denver, and then we're going to give our conference finals predictions at the end. But without further ado, make sure you guys leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, helps out a ton. But starting out with the OKC Thunder, man. Heck of a series. Kind of what I'm going to say with the Knicks in a way. I know like fans of OKC might be a little bit disappointed. This is definitely a successful season. This is a season that really kind of resets the standard for OKC in terms of how young they were and getting to the second round and losing to the Dallas Mavericks. You obviously had some holes in your roster that you definitely need to address, but that's the main question I've been seeing with this OKC team is obviously SGA having an MVP caliber season. But it's also like when I go to like social media outlets talking about the Thunder, they're like, why didn't they trade for big at the deadline? Why didn't they trade for this person, that person? Because they obviously have the assets to do it. Out of any team in the league to be good right now, they are perfectly set up to have a large window, a very large window to win a championship. And that's where I kind of want to start. Kind of what I talked about with the Magic about a week or so ago when they got eliminated. You're a young team, for sure. The window isn't open forever. They're a young team. They're best players on cheaper contracts at the moment in terms of Banchero and Franz for them. I was more so talking about them and comparing the two teams because they're very young and I kind of, you could say, ahead of schedule. Looking at it, this is not a time to be passive. Like I said with the Magic, the OKC obviously is set up for the next couple of years, next decade plus, to really be one of the only teams other than the Boston Celtics have had the past couple of seasons to have a large title window. Because I think I've said this on the podcast before, but looking back towards, God, I don't even remember what episode it was. I was talking about OKC, the young core, when they had KD, Russ, and Harden, and when they lost in the finals, if you ask anybody back then, if this team would be back here in this same position, they would have said yes. Now, this OKC team is younger, and they're probably set up, they're actually way better set up in terms of draft capital and asset-wise to make the roster better compared to that younger OKC Big 3 team that made the finals. But the window is weird in the NBA. The window doesn't stay open long. There isn't, with how injuries happen in the league, that window could be shut for you, right? Look at, for example, they had off-the-court stuff, but look at the Memphis Grizzlies. When they lost to the Golden State Warriors in the second round, you could argue like they probably thought their window was super wide open. Then they had a down year. Yes, they're going to have a lottery pick, and I expect them to be a real contender next year. But when you're looking at it, like the West has gotten better since the Memphis Grizzlies have been there. Like teams are on the up and up. So it's like that window doesn't stay open as long as people think. And I think people think just because they're a young team, they have assets, the window's open forever. Why not be aggressive right now? What's holding you back from being aggressive right now? I do actually believe that it was a smart move for them to not get a big at the deadline, obviously for multiple reasons. So they obviously wanted to see what they had with this team. They love this team. They want to see what they have. I mean, they were good enough to make it to the second round and losing tough 6 games to Dallas, but they want to see what they have. I can never fault a team for wanting to see what they have, especially when they have the assets that they do. But it's also to the point where I'm like, maybe it was better on them to not make a trade at the deadline and to wait till the offseason. Because now in the offseason, you're a lot more flexible when it comes to making moves in terms of what other teams are doing. Not so much of what they're doing, what other teams are doing. So looking at them, like at the deadline, who were they going to get? Like you could have said an Andre Drummond, which I think would have helped. But I mean, that even has a ceiling on it. Like who was that in the market that they were going to get? I've heard like Nicholas Claxton. Brooklyn was pretty stern at the deadline. They didn't want to move anybody for real. Think of another big like a Jared Allen, like who I think they could realistically go get this offseason depending on how, especially with the way how the Cavs season ended. when you're looking at Jared Allen at that time during the trade deadline, there was not a whole lot of faith that they were going to move him, especially with the injuries to Darius Garland, Evan Mobley. Jared Allen was having a great year. They couldn't afford to move off of Jared Allen for what anything OKC could offer at that current time period. Especially at that point in time, they were hot. They were one of the hottest teams in the league. They had this crazy run with Darius Garland and Evan Mobley out for most of that. So even then, now looking on it now, they're in a way better position to get a young piece that kind of fits their timeline in Jared Allen to pair with a Chet Holmgren because of how the Cavs season ended with him hurt. There's a lot of talk around people were frustrated because he didn't play through it and get a shot to play through it or whatever. I don't know how real that is, but they're in a way better position to go trade for these two guys now compared to when they were, especially a name like Jared Allen, who is somebody who could be a great fit for what they do. So I'm going to give them props on that for being patient and staying pat on making a ton of moves at the deadline. I mean, they went out and got Gordon Hayward. He was nothing for them. They're probably going to address that. They have the 12th overall pick in the draft, so with them mocked, I think I have them going Kevin McCullough. Just somebody NBA ready. If you trade for a Jared Allen, that pick might be in the conversation to be used. They have a ton of other draft picks that they could use, but more so my takeaways from OKC. This is not a real time I think they can to stay kind of passive. You know what you have in SGA. J-Dub is a great number 2 option. You know what you're getting out of Chet Holmgren, and really in Chet's first year fully showed great things. This team is still super young. I feel like you already have the makings of a big 3 with those 3 that I just named, and you have a supporting piece like a Cason Wallace who played great. Aaron Wiggins played really good. Josh Giddey is the odd man out, which I've seen that they're probably going to be shopping him around this offseason, which I think it makes sense unless they're going to prioritize him to coming off the bench. But I think he's too valuable of an asset to where they can get just a better fitting piece in the long run. Looking towards them, how I would love to see them be aggressive this offseason. At least I'm not saying go out here and get these big names, but get maybe some more big man depth. Maybe get another versatile wing off your bench. Looking at things like that, because looking at this series, it's they had Lou Dort getting some foul trouble. Guarding Luka Doncic is going to happen. I think them having another defensive-minded wing off that bench, so you don't have to sacrifice J-Dub possibly getting in foul trouble, putting him on Luka, or SGA. You know what I'm trying to say? They need just a little bit more depth at that wing spot, that bigger wing spot, and that big man spot. I think that there's times where they kind of just got bullied by the Dallas Mavericks and killed on the boards, which is what you're going to see everywhere. But I think they're in a good position, especially going into the offseason. I'm going to say it's a successful season for OKC for sure. But they're in a way better spot in trading for the guys they need, I feel like, on this roster than they were at the deadline, because it's always hard to trade at the deadline unless the team is absolutely trying to blow it up. So looking at them trying to possibly trade for Jared Allen, looking at hindsight, they probably weren't doing it at that time anyways. They would have probably had to give up more with how the Cavs were doing at that current time to get Jared Allen, and even then, they probably would have said no because they were on a run. They were one of the hottest teams in the league. But now looking at it, might be a little bit cheaper to get Jared Allen on this team. So looking at it that way, sky's the limit for the OKC Thunder team, but I don't think the window is going to be open as long as they think it is. They're obviously set up better than any team in the league for future success, but they have to make the right moves to put themselves back into that picture. With how the league is going, the West is just getting better and better and better. You could argue there's a legit 11 teams, 12 teams that can make the playoffs in the West for real next year. So looking at that, I just hope to see a little bit more aggression with their draft capital, because you're not going to be able to have all those rookies on the team at one time. I really want to see them get more aggressive with that draft capital and pivot towards using those picks to really influx this roster, because you have it right now. You have an MVP level talent. You have a good number 2. You could add a number 2B in this situation, depending on who you go get. You can add more big man depth. They have so much stuff that they could do to the roster to make them a better team moving forward. And I think that's what the OKC Thunder need to do to be more aggressive in the future. This is a very important offseason. They have to go be aggressive. Looking at the Dallas Mavericks, I had them personally making the Western Conference Finals, and they've done this with a banged-up Luka Doncic. I think Kyrie Irving was good, for sure, against OKC, not great. He really found that balance between scoring and playmaking. And then when you're looking at the others, PJ Washington was huge. Derrick Jones Jr. was huge, especially in these last 3 games. Derek Lively, rookie, double-double off your bench, had like 15 rebounds. Phenomenal in the closeout game. SGA with a tough call on PJ Washington in the corner, but you got to live with it. And then looking at it, I feel like this Dallas Mavericks team can still be better. Like, you're playing with a banged-up Luka. I think it's going to be a great test defensively for them against the Timberwolves team, who are coming off beating Denver Nuggets. And they're going to come in with this series with all the confidence in the world, but we'll get to that in the predictions. But looking more so at it, the others really stepped up when Luka didn't have his Luka-esque performances in games. Kyrie hit some timely shots and got some timely plays when they needed him to. But the others are really the thing that catalyzed and catapulted this team into the conference finals. But we'll talk about more on them when we get to the conference finals predictions. Now, man, getting into Eastern Conference, Knicks and Pacers. Man, crazy series, up and down. Injuries riddled throughout the entire Knicks team. Did all you could in Game 7. DiVincenzo gave you 40. Alec Burks gave you 25 plus. Jalen Brunson, I mean, you could see the energy on the team kind of deflate when he broke his hand on that swipe down on Tyrese Halliburton. Josh Hart banged up. He didn't really seem like himself out there on the court. OG tried to give it a go. Hit 2 big shots, really get the crowd going in the start of the game. Didn't play the rest of the game. Jalen Brunson on his post-game was talking about if it was a successful season. He said no. But kind of in terms of OKC and what I mean with like their seasons, if they're successful or not. I'm definitely going to say it's a successful season. Definitely. I like to think of this as it's resetting the standard. Knowing New York and even OKC, these teams before this season were kind of in a weird spot where like, oh, they had talent, they were good. They didn't really have a standard. More so OKC, they were young, they were good, but what was the standard going to be? OKC has set their standard to, we're the 1 seed. We can be the best team regular season-wise in the Western Conference, but what's going to be that next step for us to go to compete for a championship? I think the Knicks are in that same boat. I think the Knicks are in that same realm to where like they're a little bit older of a team than OKC is, but they're still relatively young. They just had a lot of injuries to this team. I mean, you could argue their top 7 guys out of their rotation were injured. Like, and on a fully healthy team, you got to think DiVincenzo is probably a bench piece. Like, you could argue Josh Hart's off the bench. Like that's how good DiVincenzo and Josh Hart have been for this team. And looking at it more so, they're another team that has a lot of questions in this offseason. They're a team that needs to really look themselves in the mirror about Julius Randle. He's an avenue for them to get even better, a better fitting piece. Isaiah Hartenstein's a free agent. OG Anunoby's going to get probably paid. Don't know how much he's going to get paid because he does have some injury concerns that are lurking, but they're probably going to pay for him. They already gave up a lot to get him. I guarantee you they're going to pay a lot to keep him. You're going to have DiVincenzo, Josh Hart, McBride, Brunson obviously back. I would like to see them go because they do have 2 lottery picks. I don't know what they're going to do with them. I'm going to come out with my part 2 to my mock draft of trades of what I feel like they should do with those 2 picks. Could trade them, could draft for fit. Looking at them, I do really think they need a backup point guard, a real facilitator. Like looking at the series, TJ McConnell off that bench was really setting the table for that bench unit. That's why the bench unit for Indiana has been so successful all season long, because they have somebody in a TJ McConnell to really set the table for these guys. And I think that's what the Knicks need. I love McBride, but I feel like he's more of a 2. I feel like he's best when he's in the game to look to get his rather than to set everybody else up. I think they could really use a backup point guard, especially kind of to relieve some pressure off of Jalen Brunson at times. If they're fully healthy, I mean, like I said, I think if they were fully healthy, they could really, really give the Celtics a run if they were fully healthy. And if they were fully healthy, I think they take care of the Pacers. You got to think that Mitchell Robinson, Julius Randle, OG, Bogdanovich, Josh Hart was banged up. Jalen Brunson breaking his hand. He wasn't having the greatest Game 7, but with how close that game got, you could feel if Jalen Brunson was out there, it would have been different. Not saying they would have won the game, but if Jalen Brunson, even though he wasn't having the best game, that was like deflating for the team, it looked like. Looking at it, for what they should probably do this offseason, like I said, probably look to get a secondary playmaker off that bench, a real playmaker, somebody that can help set the table for these guys. You have questions with Julius Randle. He was out for majority of the back half of the year, and just with OG Anunoby, like, they were really good. They were really good. And I feel like they might be a little bit better without Julius Randle. I don't know. That's a question I have for you guys in the comments. Like, what should they do with Julius Randle? Should they trade him? Should they bring him back? Because I want to say he's due for an extension at some point. I want to say, and off the top of my head, I want to say he's due for an extension at some point. So I pose that question to you guys in the comments. Like, what should they do? Because I don't really know what they should do with Julius Randle. I'm kind of really going to dive into it once the season ends, and I kind of break down the offseason for all these teams. But it's going to be interesting to see what they do with Julius Randle and Isaiah Hartenstein, because he's been phenomenal for them. And looking towards, like, because Isaiah Hartenstein is going to probably get paid. So it's going to be interesting to see where they go in the draft. And they have a very interesting offseason. They have a lot of question marks this offseason, but I feel like if they play their cards right, they can be in the same position next year. Tibbs is also due for an extension. I've already heard those talks of Tibbs getting an extension before they got to the second round, I believe. Looking at it, Jalen Brunson had an MVP type of season. I'm going to say this is a successful season for the Knicks. This is resetting the standard for what they are looking to do moving forward. They're going to continue to be a good team moving forward, and resetting the standard for the fan base. For a lot of time, they were in the gutter. This is the most success they've had really in a long, long time in terms of a passionate fan base for them. This is resetting the standard to what they are looking for going forward. Like, I'm going to say it's a successful season, but going into next year, I mean, if they lose in the second round again, like, then the questions start to realize. But this season alone, resetting the standard, in my opinion, for what they are going to do looking forward, has to be a successful season. They do have a lot of questions this offseason. Julius Randle, the OG Anunoby contract. What do you do with Hartenstein? You have 2 draft picks in the first round. They're probably going to have 2 draft picks in this first round again the year after this. So they have an interesting offseason with a lot of question marks, but I do feel like if this team is fully healthy and fully loaded, which is always a question for every team, they are going to be in a prime spot to get right back to the situation next year and with another chance to go to the Eastern Conference Finals, especially with the way the East stacks up at certain times. I feel like this is a team to where if they make the right moves and play their cards right, they are going to be right back in the same position that they were this year. Looking up towards the Pacers, I mean, Pascal Siakam. I mean, he's the vet on this team. This is why they traded for Pascal Siakam, for moments and situations like these. Came out the gates early, set the tone, had a tough couple of nice buckets. He had Hartenstein in the blender on that one play with spin. He and Halliburton set the tone in a world where they're playing at MSG. Tensions are high. I feel like the Knicks kind of came out a little stiff. They feel like they kind of knew the pressure, knew the moment. And looking at this series, the Nembhard 3 changed the entire dynamic of the series. There's 2 moments that changed the dynamic of the series. One was the OG Anunoby injury. I thought that was huge in Game 2 because that was the main defensive option on Pascal Siakam. And once OG was out, that main option was a Josh Hart, who's a physical defender but smaller than Pascal. And then it was Precious Achiuwa, who was another option on Pascal. But once OG Anunoby went out and once Nembhard hit that 3, the whole series changed. The whole entire series changed. The momentum shifted. But the Pacers came out and responded. They came out, punched the Knicks first, got out to the lead, didn't look back. They couldn't miss at all. 76% shooting at the half. They just came out, punched the Knicks in the mouth, and didn't look back. I knew the Knicks were going to end up making a run eventually. It's just when it was going to happen. They ended up making the run, and even then, the Pacers still responded, especially when Jalen Brunson went out of the game in that fourth quarter. They ran away with it. Tyrese Halliburton, I've been in this NBA group chat we have criticizing Tyrese Halliburton, like, where's the aggressiveness? Is super, super up and down. This game came out aggressive. Pascal Siakam came out aggressive, setting the tone, and then that just set the tone for everybody else. TJ McConnell came off the bench and gave them a spark like he always does. Neesmith was perfect from the floor. They were just firing on all cylinders, and without Jalen Brunson, the Knicks had no chance, even with him playing bad. But when they did make the run, with him going down, I just feel like the Pacers really controlled this game throughout. Great to them, because I've been seeing a lot of people talk about, oh, the Pacers are only here because of injuries. Cool. You have to have luck in the playoffs. You have to have luck in the playoffs, especially when it comes to making runs. People are going to compare this to the Atlanta Hawks run when they made the conference finals. I'm going to say this Indiana Pacers team might be a little bit better top to bottom than that Hawks team, but all I see now is, oh, the Pacers are only here because of injuries. I kind of want to put that narrative to bed, because every single team that has won a championship, you can look at one series and be like, oh, that's why they won the championship, because this person or that person was hurt. You can say for any team, not saying Indiana's winning a championship team, but look at all the teams in the past that have gone on runs that maybe they weren't supposed to. You need a little bit of luck in sports to go far in the playoffs. I'm not going to trash the Indiana Pacers on their run and say they shouldn't be celebrating when they beat the Knicks that were hobbled and the Bucks that were hobbled. They just have to play who's in front of them. It's not their fault that the cookie crumbled that way. It's not their fault that Giannis was hurt and Dame got hurt. It wasn't their fault that the Knicks completely had injuries throughout the whole roster. They have to take care of business. You would be having more questions about them if they didn't take care of business. So, looking at that, we're going to get into their matchup versus Boston and what I think about that. But looking at it, they should be happy and able to celebrate. It has a fan base, has players on this team, because it's not their fault that they got to choose this road. They didn't choose this road that they're on right now. I'm super excited for this team, because this is a Pacers team that hasn't been there since Paul George was there, I believe, to the conference finals. So looking at that, they have a tough task against Boston. I feel like on both sides of that, it's going to be the best team that each team has played. So it's going to be a very interesting series, but we'll get into that later in the episode. Getting in, Wolves, Denver. Man, Game 7. If I set the stage for you and told you the box score at the end of the game, and I told you that Jamal Murray would have about 30, I want to say at 34, and then Jokic having 30 and 20, you would, at home, and I told you they were up about 15 at half, you would have thought, oh, there's no way Denver lost this game. There's no way Denver lost this game. At some point, early third quarter, Jamal Murray hits a corner three to make the score 58-38. And the Minnesota Timberwolves were on the run of a lifetime. Being down 20 in the second half of Game 7 on the road against the defending champs, who also have the 3-time MVP on their team. This is a win where if the Minnesota Timberwolves win a championship, they're going to look back and be like, this win right here solidified this team into why they made the run. I already think they had a game like that in the first 2 games in the series. They won 3 games in Denver. Defending champions. Everybody, when they talk about Denver, how hard it is to beat Denver in Denver. Due to the altitude, the crowd. They did it 3 times in the series. 3 times. The defensive mindset in the second half, because Anthony Edwards obviously didn't have that great of a game. He took that Jamal Murray matchup personal. That's what it looked like. Took it personal. They shut the door on Jamal Murray in the second half of the game. He had 29, like 26 at half, I think. He had mid to high 20s at half. This was like the first time we've seen Jamal Murray really get off in this series. And when I'm watching it with my guys, the question is, man, Jamal Murray just picks the right times to go off in these series. But looking at it, that defense that Anthony Edwards played on Jamal Murray was phenomenal. Getting those fast break dunks, getting some steals, getting out in transition, really allowed Anthony Edwards to get into rhythm, because he really was struggling at the start of the game in the first half with them blitzing and doubling him on every touch, basically. Not a lot of guys have Anthony Edwards' ability to be the focal point on offense, but to also be able to be, at times, the best defender on his team. When I say that, I mean him able to take that Jamal Murray assignment and completely shut the door on one of the best playoff risers ever. It speaks volumes, because at his age, being 22, being the focal point on this Minnesota Timberwolves team offensively, him not having it going and being able to be like, I can affect the game in other ways. Let me go shut down the opposing team's best perimeter player and Jamal Murray, who's already having a phenomenal game, who's already well in rhythm, to completely lock him down in the second half. Speaks volumes. I'm not going to be one out here comparing Anthony Edwards to Kobe or Jordan, but this is This was a very defining game for Anthony Edwards. To be having a game where you're offensively not producing in a game 7 when your team is down, to come out in that second half and to really put the pressure back on Denver with that run, and to be able to start it with your defense, get yourself going offensively through your defense. Not a lot of superstars in the league, and I do say superstars, have the ability to be the best focal offensive point, and at stretches, at times, I'm not saying he's the best defensive player on his team, to be the best defensive player through stretches and be able to shut down opposing other all-star caliber players like a Jamal Murray. I know he's not an all-star. He's an all-star caliber player for sure. He's one of the best playoff risers ever, like I said. So it speaks volumes for Anthony Edwards to be able to do that. I feel like this is a very, I guess, big, like this, it means a lot knowing that the adversity that this team went through in this game makes me think this is just a mentally tough Timberwolves team, and they're going into the rest of the playoffs thinking they could beat anybody. So now when I look at the Timberwolves team, it's championship or bust. It's championship or bust. You beat the Denver Nuggets on their home floor in Game 7 after being down 20 at half. Why would you think any other team could mess with you? And they shouldn't. With what they have, they should be confident. This is turned into, I guess, what people would think to be, oh, they may be able to do a Cinderella run-esque, because I feel like the Timberwolves in the playoffs have had their ups and downs, especially when they played Memphis a couple years ago. But now it's championship or bust. It's championship or bust now. You're one of the 4 remaining teams to win a championship. In my opinion, I like them against the Mavs. With that defensive pressure, I like them against Boston or Indiana, whoever comes out the East. So looking at that, this has turned into Cinderella run-esque, because a lot of people had Denver winning against them in that series, including me, but it's turned into a championship or bust like kind of situation for them. Like, this is a first conference finals for this team, and so long with this group of guys, they have to get it done. I feel like this is, like we talked about, how windows close in the NBA. You beat Denver, you have all the confidence in the world going into the conference finals. This has turned into you're disappointed if you don't win the title. That's what this has turned into for the Minnesota Timberwolves. It's going to be interesting to see. They got a tough matchup against Dallas, who is also should be feeling confident. Just beat the 1 seed. You beat the Clippers. They're going to have all the confidence in the world because, like I said, the Dallas Mavericks could possibly be in a world where they really believe that they could play better. Game 1's on Wednesday. You get Luka a couple days of rest, who's been banged up. It's going to be interesting to see Game 1, what unfolds and what happens. But we'll get into that later on. Another thing I wanted to touch on before we get to Denver, Jaden McDaniels offensively has stepped up in a huge way, and when he is able to really perform offensively like this, I'm not saying he's going to be averaging 20 or whatever, but look at Game 6 and Game 7, 21 points in Game 6, 8 for 10 from the field, 23 points in Game 7, 7 for 10 from the field. Not saying those are going to be just the numbers I would want to see nightly, but him being able to step up when Anthony Edwards didn't have it going in that Game 7 and go on little spurts of his own with Karl-Anthony Towns and Naz Reid, really shows the progression of Jaden McDaniels as just a player in general. We know what he is defensively, but offensively, if he adds a little bit more to his bag, because I feel like his offensive bag is deeper than what a lot of people think, they could have something special going on in Minnesota for a good amount of time. Now, getting into Denver, I mean, like I said, if you looked at the box score, you would automatically think Denver won this game when you look at what Jamal Murray had and what Nikola Jokic had. You would think this is a done deal. They won this game. They go moving on to the conference finals. Jokic and Murray really gave you everything you wanted. Jamal Murray was huge. Got this team going in the first half. And I just think him and Jokic got a little gas because really how Minnesota was guarding them, they were making everybody else around them try to beat them, and the others just didn't step up. Aaron Gordon didn't have a good game. KCP has really been struggling. He's been banged up throughout this entire series along with Jamal Murray. MPJ has been non-existent in this series. There's been a lot of games where he hasn't even closed. It's just, he only had one game in double figures. This is a man that was averaging like 25 against the Lakers. One game he had in double figures. Obviously tough matchup for MPJ. one of the things I have for him is more so like he has to develop something else to bring to this Nuggets team, because this is not a Nuggets team that won the championship last year. I know Aaron Gordon's due for an extension as well, and Jamal Murray is going to be due for an extension, so it's going to be even tougher to build the pieces around this team or outside of the core four. He has to evolve and develop something else, because if he's not shooting the ball at a high clip like he was in the Lakers series, he's kind of just like a liability in a way that other team can get off offensively through him going at MPJ defensively. And I just feel like there's times where he just was just unplayable, and you would rather have the Christian Braun minutes out there over MPJ. And it was crazy to think that way, but it was the truth. Christian Braun gave them a lot of great effort plays. He was way better defensively. MPJ, tough series. Only one game above double figures. It's tough. He's somebody that you definitely needed to show up in this game. And even with being up 20, I feel like at this point in the third quarter, Jokic didn't really get that breather that he usually does, and I feel like it showed in that fourth. He just looked gassed towards the back half of that fourth quarter. And that bench, I mean, you only got 4 or 5 points from your bench, and it was all Christian Braun. They're in a tough spot, because this Minnesota Timberwolves team, I think somebody asked Jokic on his postgame, it was like, could this possibly be a rivalry? And it's basically summed up with like, yeah, they're the perfect team, made team to beat us. They're made to beat the Denver Nuggets, and that's what the mindset was with this Minnesota Timberwolves team. They're really the only team in the league with the size and the depth and the length in that front court position to really bother Jokic. I mean, he still had a phenomenal game, but it's the making things tough on him that I feel like dragged him down a little bit, and I think he just got gassed towards the end of that game. Same with Jamal Murray, and he had a great game offensively in the first half, but in that second half, it kind of showed what has been happening the whole series for Jamal Murray. He's kind of been getting banged up, pushed around. He's obviously banged up, but it was more so the defensive pressure that Anthony Edwards put on him, Nickeil Alexander-Walker put on him, Jay McDaniels put on him. Whatever the matchup was, it was a tough night for Jamal Murray in certain situations. But looking at this Denver Nuggets team, they need to figure out some more scoring off that bench. They have the 28th pick in the draft. They could really go anywhere. They need to get an NBA-ready guy, because with their flirting with the second apron, they need to really look into this draft and be like, we really need to hit with this draft pick. Because I feel like they need a playmaker off the bench to set the table for guys. Because I feel like just looking at this series in general, and they handled the Lakers. So I'm just going to say this series in general, they could have used, because those Reggie Jackson minutes weren't the best and weren't good. He's getting up there in age. You need to get somebody that can really benefit being a shot creator off the bench, that can really give you shot creation, not just a bunch of hustle, dirty work guys like a Christian Braun. They need somebody who can legit handle their own, create their own shot, be able to run a pick and roll with a Jokic if Jamal Murray's off in the game. And I feel like they also need, because the unstoppable thing with the Denver Nuggets is like, what do teams do when you get to that pick and roll? And I'm just saying the Timberwolves are a perfectly built team to compete with the Denver Nuggets for a series. I'm not saying that it's just not going to work for any other teams, because Denver probably would have just went to the finals or went to the conference finals and beat whoever was on the other side of the bracket if things fell that way, but it didn't. So what I'm trying to say is like, they definitely need to kind of bolster back this bench. And I think they really could use another real deal, like shot creator, scorer off that bench, depending on who you go get. I think they need to address the guard spot. Like I said, Reggie Jackson's getting up there in age. You have Zeke Naji, who's under contract, who they re-signed like a year ago or something like that. He's making like $8 million on his contract. He was somebody I thought could really turn into a real backup five. He was nothing in this series. You got to just have better play from MPJ and Aaron Gordon in a Game 7. You know Aaron Gordon's always going to be due for like 1 or 2 games in the series where has like 18 and 10 or 11, but in this series, in this game right here, it wasn't that. They really shut down all of his avenues and how he gets his offensive game going through lobs and getting behind the defense and everything else like that. So looking at Denver, prime spots are running back. Obviously, it's hard to go back-to-back. They just won the championship last year. So looking at it in that terms, they do have some questions I think they need to address if they do want to continue to compete for championships. You have the best player in the world still, in my opinion. It's just these supporting pieces. I feel like you need to get a little bit better. I think they need to have a good draft. I think they need to hit with that 28th overall pick or possibly trade up which could be in their best interest. They need a backup guard to replace Reggie Jackson. KCP is also a free agent. He's probably going to opt out of his deal to try to get one more good payday from him. And he's somebody who his value around the league is still very high. A knockdown shooter that is an all league defender still. So interested to see what they do with him because he could be out on the open market trying to get a bag still. So it's going to be an interesting offseason for them. We're kind of going to get into that once we do get into the full offseason. But we can kind of get into conference finals predictions and what we can dive into here. So looking at Boston versus Indiana, best test for both teams, like I said. Pacers kind of need to do what they did in Game 6 and Game 7. They need to come out and control the pace early. I think this is Game 1 is for sure a game that I can see the Pacers grabbing. Boston Celtics have been off for a little bit with the way the Indiana Pacers are playing with confidence now. I feel like Tyrese Haliburton has really gotten his groove and his confidence back that we saw early on in the season, which could be a great thing for the Indiana Pacers. And the Boston Celtics are a team that historically we've seen kind of play down to competition at times. I feel like they've done it in the first 2 rounds of this playoffs with the Heat and the Cavs at times. This is the best team and they're fully healthy with the Indiana Pacers. I think the X factor has to be Tyrese Haliburton for the Pacers. He has to continue to be aggressive. They're a completely different team, like I've said, when he is aggressive, because he gives them another really score. They score by committee. If it's not Pascal Siakam, it's really score by committee. And with Tyrese Haliburton also being aggressive like he was in Game 6 and Game 7, it's really going to make the difference in this Boston series because Boston has scoring throughout that whole entire starting 5. So if Tyrese Haliburton is going to need to be with Pascal Siakam, and they're going to need to be a really good 1-2 punch along with Miles Turner. What I'm looking at the Pacers also is if they can figure out a way to make the others beat them, because when I'm going into this series and the way the pace of the game can go, and Boston can have these like offensive moments where they're just like bad three, bad mid-range, 2 contested, and then offensively they just look all out of whack. If the Pacers can control the pace and make Boston play really up and down, and knowing how Boston can their offense can kind of result in just a bad shot attempts a lot of times, they can really make this an interesting series. Because with their defense, knowing they have the ability to guard. The question with the Indiana Pacers is always their defense. Once they've added Pascal Siakam, they've been a middle of the pack defense. So I'm interested to see. He's probably going to have the Jason Tatum assignment along with Nesmith. He's probably going to have the Jason Tatum assignment. Going to be interesting to see what they do. I think TJ McConnell can play another huge role in this series because of his effort and aggression defensively and being able to pick up 94. Nembhard is going to be huge. He's been super steady throughout this New York Knicks series, has a young guard who was getting torched by Jalen Brunson. Most people would fold, but he hit one of the biggest turning points of the series, last series against the Knicks. And I feel like he's been a steady, consistent number 2 ball handler with Tyrese Haliburton on the floor. TJ McConnell, like I said, it's going to have to be huge. I'm interested to see Obi Toppin's role. He's another person that could, off the bench, have a Jason Tatum assignment or Jaylen Brown assignment. But with Kristaps Porzingis out for the Celtics, I think Miles Turner, you gotta get it going early. You have to get it going early. His rim protection has been huge, especially in the Game 7 and 6. He was massive for them. He's somebody that needs to definitely get it going. This Pacers team, they need to continue to do what they do. I mean, they consistently have 5 to 7 to 8 guys in double figures on their roster. They need to continue to play with that on a Boston Celtics team that doesn't really have a deep bench. If the Pacers can really control the pace of the game, that Boston bench ain't that deep. It's not that deep, especially without Kristaps Porzingis. You have to go ahead and make Al Horford beat you. Make the other guys beat you. Just don't let it be Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown. Make Jrue Holiday offensively has been super up and down in this playoffs. Make it Jrue Holiday have a big game. Because I haven't seen him offensively have a big game in this playoffs yet. Make him have a big game offensively. Make Al Horford knock down 6 threes, 7 threes to beat you. And if they're doing that, then you just hang your hat on it, right? But they defensively need to come out with the mindset of making Al Horford or Jrue Holiday, 2 guys. Al Horford's had good games in this playoffs offensively. Make him beat you, though, still. Jrue Holiday. Make Jrue Holiday have a big game offensively. But defensively, I've really seen a lot from this team against the Knicks. Obviously, the Boston Celtics are a completely different team than the Knicks, especially offensively, but it's like they're going to have to find avenues and ways. And even with Kristaps Porzingis, I'm pretty sure he's been confirmed to be out for the first 2 games of the series, but looking at it in the way of like, if the Pacers and Boston wants to play fast and he's coming off of this calf strain, which we've seen be a lingering problem for people coming off of it and getting right back onto the court, he can be a way where the Pacers can kind of exploit the Celtics if he's not a full 100% go, which I doubt he will be by the time he does come back. But it's going to be interesting to see how the pace of the game is going to go. I think Jaylen Brown could be huge, especially in transition, how both teams like to play. Jaylen Brown's one of the best transition players in basketball. That's what I was getting at. Interesting to see what kind of series we get from Jason Tatum. With how much I like Jason Tatum, we've seen him have very up and down series in the past. But I do have Boston in 6. I think Indiana can definitely make this interesting, for sure, especially because this is going to be Boston's best test. But Boston is just obviously the better team, and I think they just are overwhelming with talent. Like I said, I feel like if the Pacers control the game in the way of like pace, I think it could be definitely interesting. But even then, I still feel like Indiana's fighting an uphill battle, and I think Boston's going to get it done in 6. Getting into Mavs and Wolves, I'm interested to see how they will play against Luka defensively, because the whole thing with OKC was the Lou Dort matchup. Lou Dort was being really, really physical, but I feel like that at times can work into Luka's favor with how much he does want to draw fouls and how much he is going to try to get to the line and try to foul bait you and get you in foul trouble to get the matchup he wants. I don't think Minnesota should be looking to try to just be super physical with Luka, because I feel like he adapts well to playing with physicality on him. And I feel like with how well he draws fouls, you would hate to see like Jaden McDaniels getting foul trouble early in the game, and then you're forcing Anthony Edwards to guard Luka when he's your best offensive option. Or I feel like even Nickeil Alexander-Walker is just a little bit too small to guard Luka. So it's going to be definitely interesting, because Luka is not Jamal Murray, and they're not going to really be able to just push Luka around. Luka is a 6'7", 6'8", heavy guard. So it's going to be interesting to see how they match up with him defensively, because he's somebody that can control the pace. He's so good at drawing fouls, and he's so good at controlling the pace of the game. It's going to be interesting to see what they do and how they do end up pressuring him. It's also going to be interesting to see. I'm pretty sure they're probably going to have Rudy just in drop, especially on those pick and rolls. And I feel like they're going to really force Kyrie to beat them rather than Luka. It's going to be a very big-time series for Kyrie Irving. This is the second time second time Luka's been to the conference finals, but Kyrie Irving is a champion. Looking at, he just has to be aggressive. He has to be aggressive. I feel like in OKC series, they got away with Kyrie being more of that facilitator, playmaker, and picking his spots offensively down the stretch of games. But this is a series where, like, to really relieve pressure off of Luka, he has to be like mid to high 20s every game in terms of points. And I feel like he has to be bare minimum at least 18 to 25 shots a game. Because in that OKC series, there's a lot of times where like PJ Washington's getting more shots than him. I feel like this is a series where, depending on how the Timberwolves play them, he's going to be able to operate in that mid-range with how they guard pick and rolls. He's going to be somebody that can really get in his bag and be able to thrive just being super aggressive. Like, go out there and create for yourself. Luka, we know, can get everybody else involved. We know he can get everybody else involved, no matter what defense they're doing. Kyrie needs to be aggressive to relieve pressure and open up the floor and open up the game to make it so another person can't send two at Luka. So, like, and also they need PJ Washington to continue to be shooting the way he's shooting. Need that to continue to happen. Lively and Gafford got to have their hands full with that Minnesota front court. How do they respond to that? It's going to be very interesting. Anthony Edwards, he already talked about in the postgame of how the Kyrie is his matchup. That's going to be interesting to see. Anthony Edwards is the kind of guy continue to be great, continue to do what he's been doing. Luka's a little banged up, but off of Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, with about 4 days rest, I mean, I expect the Mavs to be ready to go. I expect the Mavs to be really ready to go. I think it's going to be a phenomenal series. It's going to be interesting to see. I feel like it's going to be a defensive chess match between Finch, Jason Kidd. Interested to see if they can still get production from Derrick Jones Jr. offensively like they have been. It's going to be interesting. He's probably going to get the Anthony Edwards assignment. He's been phenomenal all playoffs defensively. It's going to be interesting to see if they can get a little bit of a scoring punch off that bench for Dallas in terms of a Jaden Hardy. We're pretty much due for a Tim Hardaway game at this point. He hasn't had the best playoffs so far. He was banged up coming in. But it's going to be interesting to see. I feel like it's going to be a great defensive battle. I do lean the Wolves. This is up in the air. I think this is as close as it gets because of how Minnesota's defense is. I think it's going to be interesting to see how Luka reacts to it and Kyrie reacts to it. It's going to be a great matchup. I'm going to lean Wolves in 7, though. I think this is another series where, like Denver, super intense every single game. Two great defensive teams. I'm interested to see what each coach and each team comes out with and how they play Luka and how Dallas plays Anthony Edwards and Karl-Anthony Towns. I'm interested to see how this unfolds in Game 1 on Wednesday, but I do lean the Wolves in 7. But, man, we have gotten a great playoffs up to this point. Conference Finals starts tomorrow. This will probably be up and out by tomorrow morning, but that's all I have for this episode of Let's Talk About It. Thank you guys for tuning in to the Barrel Talk Podcast. Hope to see you tune in to future episodes.